the reflexive thoughts and action patterns that we seem stuck with is its own form of what we call neuroplasticity, the brain and nervous system's capacity to change in response to experience. So that's one form, is unlearning, or sort of undoing the knot that seems built into our nervous system that we can't seem to relieve without some deliberate work. And then the other side of the coin, of course, is replacing those behaviors or adding in new behaviors and thought patterns. And that's also qualifies as neuroplasticity, changing your nervous system, but it actually requires a different form of neuroplasticity. So when we talk about unlearning or preventing reflexive thoughts and behaviors of our choice, what we're talking about is it's a process in the nervous system called long-term depression. It doesn't have to do with psychological depression. It's kind of unfortunate that the name is what it is, because we hear the word depression and we immediately go to this idea of sadness and depression. But long-term depression is actually a specific form of neuroplasticity where neurons are normally, that when one fires, the other one fires. You've heard fire together, wire together. Well, normally neurons are communicating in some very robust way. That's actually the basis of any reflex. So your ability to do something very easily and without much forethought is the one way of describing a reflex. And reflexes are very robust because the connections, the synapses between neurons that underlie them are very robust. They're what we call very reliable. And in order to make those connections less reliable, we have to create a process called long-term depression. And the way that one does that is actually very well scripted. And we'll learn some techniques today to create this, what we call long-term depression. Again, it's not psychological depression. What you're trying to do is reduce the probability that when neuron A sends a chemical signal, that neuron B will respond to that signal. So you're trying to uncouple the reflex. So that's the unlearning process, or the letting go process. There are a couple components to this process. The first one is that there has to be a clear and conscious understanding of what it is that you're trying to let go of. So if you don't have to write anything down, but if you are of the sort that likes to write things down, you want to write down that you have to have a very clear and conscious understanding of what exactly you are trying to let go of. Because one thing about reflexes is that one of the reasons that they are challenging to dismantle at a neurobiological level is because they are not super precise, right? It's like if you're somebody who, let's say, I'll use myself as an example. Let's say that I were to be a procrastinator about one thing. There's a good chance that procrastination circuit, if you will, carries over to a lot of other things. The generalizability of a lot of behaviors and thought patterns is wonderful when it serves us, but is terrible when it doesn't serve us. And so we have to be very precise in the way that we identify what it is that we're trying to change and actively work to unwire that specific set of neural circuits. So the first step in doing that is to have a very clear understanding of exactly what it is that we are trying to undo. So it can't be, for instance, let me give you an example of something rather general, which would be, for instance, in 2021, I was too busy. I want to be less busy, or I want to be less rushed, or I want to be less stressed, or I want to be less whatevered. It can't be a general state. It actually has to relate to specific behaviors or specific thought patterns. And the more clearly one can identify and articulate those in writing or in speech, the more likely it is that you'll be able to unwire them through the process called long-term depression. And I'll talk more about long-term depression in a moment. So that's the kind of neurobiological backdrop to this letting go process.